We want people to come in with their preconceived notions, their ideas of how they believe that conservation works or doesn't work. And I think really the aim of the film is for people to walk away with more questions than answers, and to realize that it's not so black and white as we initially thought, that it's much more gray. We started this about 4 years ago, and he came across some photos online of somebody who had hunted a big game. I can't remember which animal.
It was an elephant.
An elephant. And he was pretty outraged, and he was upset, and he couldn't believe that this existed and this was legal. And he can speak to his background growing up, but I grew up in northern Minnesota, where hunting is something you do as a kid and as families. It's a pastime. And so I kind of knew about trophy hunting, not to any large extent. And I kind of screamed, why are you so upset? And then that's kind of how the whole process started, is that we went to Safari Club International was the first stop. And I think that's where the industry really opened up for both of us. We didn't expect it to be such a huge industry.
Yeah, and I was outraged. Again, I'm from Israel, so originally I lived here for a long time, but I didn't grow up with hunting. So to me, even shooting a deer was killing Bambi, if you will. And, as I got into this, as Christina said, when we went to Safari Club, we saw this huge industry. And initially it was more upsetting because, look at all this money being made. But then people started to talk about the if it pays, it stays concept, and the idea of putting a commercial value on an animal. And I think that got us interested.
In addition to that, also, I think there's so much out there of those that are anti-hunting and those that are against hunting, that we felt that it was necessary to be more complex, that we understood that the industry was much more complex, and that there's never a lot of attention given to these economic models and these economic values on wildlife.
And so I think that was our journey into this film, and into giving a stage to people who believe in putting commercial value on an animal and listening to them. I think the transformation for me went on for a while. It started in Safari Club, but honestly, it was more turned around in Africa, seeing locals, meeting breeders, meeting Chris Moore, an anti-poacher who partially depends on hunting. I think that's where I understood that there isn't one solution to this problem, and then there isn't one not to do on this problem. And so to me, the transformation really happened on the ground in Africa. I think we kind of clicked with Philip, because when we met him, there was this openness to debate anything and to say, well, Philip would say, I believe in this and this, and we'd say, hey, we don't agree, but explain. And we didn't always have to agree, which was part of the beauty of kind of our relationship with Philip as a character. We would look and watch and let him talk, and then, sit around camp with and without cameras. It was very similar of a process of just kind of saying, wow, that's crazy, I totally don't understand, or I think this or that. But there was this willingness to talk to each other, which again is what we find so rare in this subject. People are so protective of where the side they come from, that I think overly they're just saying again and again their mantras without trying to open up and trying to say, hey, how could we do this together? I'd say the elephant hunt was the hardest. Both of us had not seen elephants much in the wild before joining Philip on this hunt. And so, while we knew what the goal is, and there was many almosts, it still kind of happened quick, and it was devastating. And it was sad to us. It was a hard watch. I think we both cried. We both had a really hard time with it. The footage was shaky. We planned a lot for this moment and how to film it, and on one hand we wanted it to be raw and real, but I think that really shifted when the local people came. And again, this is the ultimate mess of this subject that we try to battle with, that I think what it did to me is show me how much they just have a very different relationship to these animals than we do. And I think it's important that if we want to protect these animals, we have to get into the African mindset, or wherever it is, but talking about Africa. And so that did change a little bit the feeling, but it was definitely the hardest thing for us to film.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, Shalil said it really well, and I think it really pulls at your heartstrings. We talk a lot in this film in different discussions about the heart and mind battle, is that the emotional side of it versus the rational, logical side of it. But then you realize that, wait a second here, to the locals, this is meat and this is their livelihood. So I think that really kind of shows the complexity of it.
Yeah, it was a mix of things. It was a mix of the idea that they're seeing it as meat and are not really that sad. On the contrary, they seemed quite happy. To be honest, they were only sad with the size. They wanted a bigger elephant. And you just see this very obvious disconnect between the way we think, or at least us in the West, and the way they do. But I also understood this theory that if the locals are happy and the quotas are kept, then I believe we can see locals saying no to poachers or trying to combat that. And if those things prove to work and hunting is benefiting, then I think that's a good thing. If that doesn't work, then we should be careful about hunting that, and we should be honest about it. And again, this is where I believe it's much better to bring the two sides into dialogue, because it's not always right to hunt anywhere. And people in the hunting community know that, but they tend to push very hard for those places. On the other side, there's those who say it's never right to hunt. Well, it is if that scenario that I just described works, but we should really be open to seeing that it works and try and conduct it in the best way we can. And I think that's a really important balance.
That area in Zimbabwe where we worked with Chris Moore, who is an anti-poacher, but not necessarily solely on the soldier side. He also works within the community, which is actually an aspect that we didn't realize. And when we went in there working with him, we realized that it's much more than just being an anti-poacher. And so he goes to this village where these goats are eaten, and the family, that's their livelihood, that's their money, that's their bank, and now it's gone. A lot of times what people will do, they'll just poison the lions. They'll say, you know what, you took my bank, I don't have anything left, and just poison the lions. And what Chris tries to do is he tries to convince them and say, listen, this is all your wildlife. It's yours. You need to look after it. And so if you give an incentive to local people, it's much more viable for them to not just poison the animals, because they get something back from it. They get something actually back from the community. And so he tries to say, okay, instead, we're not going to take out this animal. If we have to, we're going to take it out. We're going to try and chase it away. We're going to do all these other things in order to incentivize you to be here and have live with these animals. And I think it's interesting because in the West, we have this perspective that a lion is a cuddly creature. It's Simba, it's the Lion King. And there, people live with lions. I think if lions were running around Brooklyn or around Dallas, we'd be very quick to take it out. But yet we're sitting here saying, well, you should just leave the animals alone.
Chris Moore has this fairly unique way of looking at anti-poaching. He's really leaving very little to clubbing people and shooting and guns. You know, we show that part in the movie too, but really he is very much after the social aspect. He needs something to give the Tonga people, which he really proudly works for. And if he can give him work, you know, a bunch of his people are ex-poachers themselves, and they'd rather do the good thing. But I think the misunderstanding from the West is, again, this naive way that we can just protect it without giving it, the community, nothing really. And it doesn't work that way, and I think one has to realize it. You know, when Chris was here promoting the movie, he was talking to a lion researchist who's funded by a green organization to collar a problem animal control lion so she can give him a call when it gets next to a village so he can go chase it away rather than them poisoning it or someone shooting. And it's that little thing of working together that'll get us further. She doesn't agree with hunting, he doesn't agree with some of her things, but they knew that saves that lion, and that means a lot to me. There are a fair amount of what's sometimes referred to as canned hunting facilities. I do think hunters say that that's not very typical, but to be honest, we think there's quite a bit of that. Now, with that said, and this is kind of strange, as a non-hunter who was disgusted by all, I'll say something that maybe hunters think differently. I think most people see this as extremely unethical hunting and very upsetting. And I understand that. And again, to me, it's a pretty strange way to go at it, sipping vodkas, shooting animals from a pickup, or putting a croc in the only pond that you have. That's not really hunting. I think most of us would agree on that. But I do want to point out something else. At the end of the day, for me, I started looking at this issue as, what are the results? How much animals do we create? And I want to be honest, the South African conservation model of giving the landowner the rights over the animal has been extremely successful. Now, while at Mabula Pro Safaris, people hunt in a canned experience, they do try to hunt older male animals, and they do create or add to the power of breeding. So once again, it's kind of complex. It is your choice as a hunter or non-hunter to boo this as loud as you will. I think didn't shy away from showing a harsh reality, and I'm proud of that. But also remember that this does add to numbers. So to us, it actually broke down to welfare, meaning if you want to hunt that way, to me, it's a little sick, I'll be honest. But at the end of the day, I'm judging, are the animals there living on a welfare happiness or well? On that farm, they do have
A lot of space.
Yeah, a lot of space. Yes, it's fenced, but it's quite big. And yes, it's made easy to shoot them, and you kind of get them from a catalog, which we can decide or not to be disgusted with. But in terms of animal welfare, I do want to say that it's definitely better than the bacon we eat from the supermarket.
You know, I think ecotourism is really great, but I think we have to remember and remind ourselves that ecotourism really does really well in areas where there's a lot of game and where there's infrastructure. So if you go to Kenya or if you go to Tanzania and you go to some of these huge parks where there's actual infrastructure and there's a lot of game, then that makes a lot of sense. And I think we need that. I think when you're going to places where Philip goes in the previous trip in Namibia or in the Zambezi Valley of Zimbabwe, it's going to be very rare that you're going to have a tourist go to those areas. There's no place to stay, there's no infrastructure, and there's not as much game. So I think it's a balance between the two. I think what hunting supplies there is what ecotourism cannot, and vice versa. There's a lot of areas that ecotourism maybe works better than hunting in the sense of the area. So I think it's that balance. You know, we didn't see a lot of photo tourism when we were there. It's like 10 hours on a truck down a dirt road in order to get out there. And I think people like Philip will go there, but neither of us would go to just take photographs.
I think when we got into this film, we were not aware of the potential benefits of putting economic value on an animal. When you put economic value on an animal, breeders will want to breed it. Certain locals will have more interest in keeping it. It is a bit odd to expect Africans to look after these animals if there is no value to it. And value can come in different ways. Value can come in a way of tourism. If there's a national park and that's the locals people treasure, then that's also putting a value on an animal. So I think, and that often is referred to scientifically as sustained utilization. How do we use these animals in a sustained way? And sustainable is a very important word here. And sometimes it's referred to as "if it pays, it stays" as a slogan. I think that's originated in South Africa. But I think the general theme here does make sense on paper. And I think, like anything in this subject, it's not a black and white. It won't make sense for all species in all places. And we definitely should not delete this idea and say, oh, let's just the wild be wild in this utopian way and never think of creating a value on an animal, because it is a tool for conservation. Yeah, I mean, look, poaching and human-wildlife conflict are the huge issues at hand. And as humans grow, and they're humans, we should cheer for them to grow. It's just a natural thing. We should understand that, and people should come first. But unfortunately, when people and wildlife connect, usually it's the wildlife that suffers. And so I think we need to create space for wildlife and to try as many different ways to fence areas and to not let people run into these areas and to really give habitat its place. But again, in order to create that, we usually need some kind of economic model. And it's very, very important. And, the same for poaching. Poaching is a huge threat, obviously, to elephants and rhinos. In Zambezi Valley, where Chris Moore is operating, they were shooting 2 elephants a day. That's a lot of elephant. They've lost 12,000 over 10 years, is what the numbers he was giving us. And when he came in and they were able to build this anti-poaching unit, they have not lost an elephant in 2 years. And just one more point that Chris usually mentions in the Q&A, where he's from, there are no rhinos left. They've all been poached, all of them. And one has to wonder if it was legal to trade in horn and the world's most expensive animal commodity was an opportunity, economic opportunity, as hard as it sounds for people, for the Tonga people in Zim, would there be rhinos there? Chris thinks there would have been.
The reaction we've gotten has been actually really great. It's hard to get people into the seats to see the film. I think that's the hardest thing. I think the minute you say to anybody that animals are going to die, they immediately shy away. But what we've realized is that once people watch the film, they really are intrigued by the subject and want to know more. And the film community is very much a community that doesn't necessarily hunt. And if they do that, have some experience with hunting, it's not hunters by every year going on big game hunts. It's people that have maybe as a child hunted, like me. So I think they come with a lot more preconceived ideas of their relationship to animals. And when the film is over, I think they really are questioning what their feelings are around this. Do they love it? Do they hate it? Do they not understand it? Do they want to know more? So the conversation becomes quite illuminating.
Yeah, we were ecstatic with the way the film community has received it. The reviews have been, I don't know, I think we're like 30 out of 30 positive. So it's all been very good. And it's been reviewed by all kinds of media from all sides. I wish, again, that the hunter side and the animal rights side would also, instead of being so upset for not being perfectly represented, perfectly in quotes, from each side, would actually see the benefits of creating a dialogue and kind of luring everybody into the middle and say, okay, let's really break this down and not be so emotional about this, but listen to each other, talk, listen, see where we could work together. Because right now the film community is raving the film and saying it's so open-minded and it's changing minds, but both sides are pretty much, I mean, you guys are a good exception, but pretty much are screaming bloody murder. And part of it said that, it's an attack on the way we hunters live, which I thought was ridiculous. And part of it said that it didn't go into sustainable use and in understanding the communities of Africa. And clearly, by everything we just discussed, that was the prime focus of our film. And so again, I'm urging people not to go with their guts. And by the way, we absolutely got attacked by Born Free and other green organizations. So I'm smiling because maybe if everybody's attacking us, we can get them to talk. Then we're doing something right. But really, I want people in the hunting community to go judge it for themselves. Because we've done test screenings with hunters to know that we're hitting the right balance, to know that we're giving them a fair shake, but also asking them to think of their practices and where they can get better. And I think that's a fair and good practice of filmmaking.
We did a screening out in LA, which is for a public radio audience. And it's very liberal, left-leaning audience. And we had Philip come and participate in a Q&A. And he's done that numerous times before. And it was interesting because after the event, there was a woman that had wrote Philip this long email and basically said, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being very elegant in your answers. And I'm sorry that the audience was heckling you sometimes. But I come from that very liberal left position, and I would never hunt. I don't like hunting. I don't like what you do. But thank you very much for bringing your story forward, because now I can look at this with a much better lens than I did before. And I think to Philip, that was a huge deal. And I think to us, it was a big deal because it really showed for at least a small moment that somebody in the audience that was totally against this actually said, well, wait a second, maybe I should think this isn't so black and white.
It's so bad in this country right now, beyond this issue. We can't talk to each other. We can't sit down and listen to each other. Walk away and disagree. That's okay. And so I think we're trying to do everything for people to not end with a statement like, I just can't listen to these people. I just can't talk on both sides. And I think we're getting somewhere for the most part.
It's both. I mean, it's more interesting when people have seen the film, because then you can really dive into these conversations where a lot of times if you don't see the film, when you mention sustainable utilization in Zimbabwe and locals having an incentive to look over the animals, people just don't get it. So I think it's twofold. When you sit down with people and they haven't seen the film, it's very interesting to hear people's preconceived ideas of what hunting is and what breeding is and how it all works together and how could you possibly kill something to conserve it. And it's interesting to watch how people talk amongst themselves and how the conversation turns and twists and goes to different angles. And then once people watch the film and you have that same conversation, it's really nice to see that people actually really want to dig more into the issues at hand and not so much just talk about these ideas, but they really start to understand that it's not one side. It's very much more than one side.
We tend to ask people before and after, how did they come in and how do they get out? And some people change their mind, some people don't. But more importantly, people are less sure and are less willing to jump to conclusions and be very aggressive about it. And I think that's a good thing.